Chapter of Nordforsk, and we are hosting this event. And Nordforsk is a Nordic Council of Ministers institution for facilitation and funding of research collaboration in the Nordics. We have, in collaboration with the national funders of research in the Nordic countries, Canada and the United States of America, developed a call for research project under the headline Sustainable Development of the Arctic. We received more than 203 proposals that are now being evaluated, and the best one will be invited to submit full proposals. I'm not going to say more about this now, but introduce you to our moderator, Andreas Østhagen. But before I leave the floor, I'll invite you all to stay for a mingle and some food and drinks after the discussions have ended. So Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The sound is on. Excellent. So I'm from the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, one of the many research institutes that I guess have applied for this funding. So we will talk afterwards, make sure it goes in the right direction. We're actually missing one panel participant. I guess he will arrive eventually. We have 6 in total in 45 or actually now 42 minutes. So this will be fast and fun. And as you can see on the screen here, the topic is International Cooperation for a Secure and Sustainable Arctic. I looked at this title before coming to Arendal and who doesn't like international cooperation for a secure and sustainable Arctic? I mean, what's the problem here? We'll try to dive into this a bit more in the nitty-gritty to see if there are issues, or at least maybe we can hear a bit more also about the Nordic countries and North American countries approach this topic. I'll actually just start with inviting all my 5, hopefully soon to be 6 participants to the stage, and I'll introduce you as we go. So just please take whichever spot you like. There's no, in Arendalsuka it's supposed to be informal. We're missing one member of parliament from Norway, but you know, he's probably coming from another seminar just around the corner. So we're in the tent of Norden, House of Norden, I was about to say, but it's a tent. So the focus here, of course, is to some extent Nordic cooperation, the various Nordic bodies that enable cooperation amongst the Nordic countries. And I want to start with you, Bryndis Haraldsdottir. I mean, you're the president of Nordic Council at the moment. I mean, you're also a member of Altinget, the Icelandic parliament. So Nordic cooperation, it's very much in vogue right now. You know, this tent is probably a sign of it, and you know, there's a reception afterwards where we can discuss this even more. But what's happening with Nordic cooperation right now? How will you work to achieve international cooperation for a sustainable and secure Arctic?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. We do not have so big democratic festival in Iceland, so I'm very amazed to be here and looking very much forward to the next couple of days. Yes, Nordic cooperation, and I'm so happy that you chose this to be here in this tent, this discussion about Arctic, because in my presidency, or the Icelandic presidency of the Nordic Council, we put Arctic on the top. So we said peace and security in the Arctic, and we have been working on that during the year, mainly on just getting the parliamentarians to discuss about the Arctic, because in many ways, I think the Arctic is so far away from me, maybe living in Oslo or Copenhagen. I think this is something that's just like ice and some iceberg or whatever, and let's preserve it. But the Arctic is much, much more than that. And security, of course, is a huge factor there. And for a small nation as Iceland, and actually all the Nordic countries are quite small in that sense, international law is what we focus on. If everyone would follow the law, then we would be better off. But now we have like the half of the Arctic is actually Russia, and they have shown us they do not follow international law. So therefore, cooperation between like-minded countries like the Nordics and our fellow Arctic countries, Canada and the US, is really important. But that, of course, means that we cannot skip a half of it. So that gives us a big dilemma in a political sense. how to focus on that. So the main issue for us is that we say, the Nordic parliamentarians and very often said, it's very important for the Nordic countries to be more aggressive in cooperation. We have had so many reports saying that the Nordics should have similar strategies or even a combined Arctic strategy. But we haven't really seen the government following up on that, but I see that people are coming closer and closer to it.
So why is that the case, you think? I mean, why haven't the Nordic countries been aggressive, if you will, in cooperating before, and why are they now?
I think, at least in my view, it would be two reasons. Both because it's just far away and it was just ice, and maybe the global eye was somewhere else than in the Arctic, and we were actually hoping for that people would just kind of follow international law. That might be one reason. But then it's also a question, what is up there? What are the values? What are the resources? Are we maybe in some way competing about how to work on that? That could also be a reason. But I feel that there is a stronger will now to be real on cooperation. And I think the reason is what we see is happening in the world, that we see there is no other way than strong and good Nordic cooperation.
Okay, excellent. The final participant. Thank you. I'll introduce you in a bit, Bård Ludvig, as well. But before that, I want to jump to Norway, or to Maria Berteresian. I mean, you're the Deputy Foreign Minister of Norway, and I know that you're very passionate about all forms of cooperation in the Arctic, the Nordic sense, EU cooperation, and also Barents cooperation, although the future of that is a bit uncertain. But could I ask you to reflect a bit on the same question that I asked Bryndis about the role of the Nordic cooperation? I mean, where do you see this heading? What interest does Norway have in promoting, pushing the Nordic cooperation?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting to this event. Let me just start off by saying that cooperation is fundamentally important because all countries, no matter the size of their economy, their defense, their geography, they're small if they're standing alone. That is why we need cooperation. That is why we need alliances. That is why we need value clubs, such as I see the EU, definitely, and the EEA agreement, which we are in on together. And the future of the Nordic cooperation is, for a country like Norway, well, it's at the very core. If we look at the world today, there are some megatrends affecting global relations. We see that, at least compared to 30 years ago, or 34 years ago, when the Berlin Wall fell, there is dramatically less international cooperation, dramatically less faith in the multilateral system, a well-organized world, which has served very well for countries such as Norway, small countries with medium-sized economies open to the world. There is less of that type of cooperation. And what concrete effects do we see of that in the Arctic? Well, it makes it very difficult to cooperate in this multilateral sense, which the Arctic Council is. Now let me just say a few words about that. The Council is very much alive. We have made sure of that during the Norwegian chairship for the 2 past years, but it has been critical to move incrementally in order to make sure it is alive. And that is taking me to my next point. It's the fact that we're living in an era of deglobalization. Regions matter more, and what we do in our regions matters even more. And that is why Nordic cooperation is so very much important. It's trending. That's good. We're like-minded countries in the Nordic. It helps. There are a lot of differences between us, and the Barents cooperation, or some would say possible breakdown of that, has actually been an example of, to show us, after Russia has exited the Barents cooperation, we have seen more clearly the differences between the Nordic countries. We didn't see them that clearly before because Russia was so much more different than the rest of the Barents countries. But now in the Nordic, it's very clear that it's the values uniting us, the values of democracy, of freedom, of rule of law. Defending those values, standing up for them, is more important than ever. And like-minded countries, such as the Nordic countries, have a lot to gain from working even more closely together in that. And in addition, I've worked quite a lot with climate previously. And it is a fact that climate change does not care about geography. It doesn't care about geopolitics. So that is the main reason to why we need organizations such as the Arctic Council, which has the core interest of the people living in the Arctic, experiencing those up to 4 times above the global average heating, which is happening in the Arctic, and working on solutions that make sense for people living there. So that was some brief thoughts on your question.
Your passionate engagement for cooperation is obvious, but can I ask you then? You mentioned the Barents Cooperation.
Yes.
Is it dead?
No. Well, it depends on how you look at it. When we got the Barents Cooperation, it was one of the results of the Berlin Wall falling down or being torn. The faith in the multilateral system, the belief that we could bring Russia to our value club to cooperate closely on issues or topics such as culture, people-to-people cooperation, or soft diplomacy areas. It created throughout those years we have had it a lot of networks, a lot of patterns, contacts, which are still there. What isn't there is Russia. What isn't there is the faith that they could be in our value club. But it is possible. We are currently chairing the Barents Cooperation together with our Nordic sister countries. And the future of the Barents Cooperation is in the Nordic. Future of the Barents Cooperation is more EU.
Okay, we will get to the EU actually at the end here. Thank you, Maria. Okay, zooming out a bit, away from Norway or away from the Nordics even, the other part of the Arctic that is not Russian, the North American part of the Arctic. We have 2 representatives here from Canada and the United States. And Amy Baker, you're the ambassador of Canada to Norway. And I wanted to ask you a bit. I mean, we're in Arendalsuka, and not everyone in this room perhaps follow Arctic issues as closely as some of us or some of you. So what are the challenges you're facing in your Arctic? Because they are rather different than what we face, right?
Yes, correct. So I've been here for about a year, and I've had the chance to speak and listen at a number of different discussions on the Arctic. And usually, it's a conversation predominated by security, with very good reasons, given the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, given the change in the dynamic. Even in Canada, we've just recently had our defense policy update, which focuses a lot on increasing our investment, our collaboration, and our focus on the North when it comes to defense spending and defense engagement. But I think the comment I would make from the Canadian perspective is that we see the Arctic as really at a crossroads where there are a few different issues, and there's a temptation to talk about defense and security in a silo, and we really have to, we do that at our peril. Climate, I'm glad you mentioned climate, Maria. Of course, we see globally a real mobilization given the fragility of the Arctic environment and a lot of people engaging on that front to try to protect the environment. We also see that change in environment is leading to really internationally interesting economic opportunities that a variety of players are engaged in, whether that could be fishing, whether that could be natural resources, whether that could be shipping, which means that with our Arctic allies, we really need to be looking at sustainable economic development together with Indigenous and Northern communities to ensure that part of the security is there as well. And finally, in Canada, we can no longer rely on the wall of ice and snow that we had for years as a border to defend us. We do need to also integrate defense into that. Perhaps one thing that's a little bit different about the Canadian Arctic, it's 40% of our land mass, which is huge. And so it's really important for our culture, for our identity, for our economy, for our prosperity. It's got approximately 200,000 people living on it. That's 0.5% of our population. So that's really significant. And having been now a couple of times to the Norwegian North, it's a very different outlook. And it means that what we have to focus on is not just at a national level engagement, it means that the resilience of our northern communities is actually an international issue as well. That it's really important that we listen to our Indigenous and northern communities, we learn from them, and we integrate them into the decision making. And this is something that the Arctic Council does very well, and it's something we can't do alone as Canada, because those Indigenous communities also cross borders. So we need to work with our Arctic allies on issues pertaining to governance in the Arctic. We also need to work with like-minded non-Arctic states on issues that are global, whether we're talking about migratory habitats for birds or plastic in oceans. These are all things that we need to work collaboratively on in a global environment. So I think what I would say from the Canadian perspective is that we really need to avoid those silos of just talking about defense and security, or just talking about the economy in the North, or just talking about the global issues. And it's more complicated, it's harder. It also needs to involve the people who live in that region. And that I think that's the perspective that we're trying to take in Canada together with our allies.
But can I ask you, I mean, as a Norwegian who has lived in Canada, so no disrespect, but I think for most Norwegians, they don't think about Canada often, right? Apart from when Canada beats us in Olympics, like you actually just did a few days ago in some competition. But let's not talk about that. But but given that Norwegians probably don't necessarily think of Canada very often, does Nordic cooperation, I mean, since we're in the tent of the Nordic cooperation, does Nordic cooperation matter to Canadians or to Canada? I mean, I get, you mentioned the Arctic Council, which is one of these venues where Norway meets, or the Nordic countries meets Canada, but the Nordic cooperation happens a bit elsewhere.
I think that given the trends we're seeing towards authoritarianism, the attacks on inclusive democracies, the campaigns of disinformation and misinformation that we're seeing, the fact that there is such shared values between Canada and each and every one of the Nordic countries means that we need to kind of work together even more than we have. And honestly, those shared values are, every time we meet, part of the reason we don't think about each other very much is because we're aligned. There's no problem there. There's no issue there. But we need to probably in the future even more forcefully come together and push those values in international fora, because there is a lot left to do. And with that in mind, we're actually planning right now a foreign minister level meeting in the autumn for Canada and all the Nordic countries to have exactly those discussions. So yes, it's there. Maybe it's not front page news everywhere like Olympic victories might be, but it's something that all of our governments believe in and rely upon, and it's a foundation to our collaboration.
Okay, then let's go to front page news. United States.
Andreas.
we have Jamal Al-Musavi, who's Deputy Chief of Mission at the United States Embassy here in Norway. And I mean, I can't say the same about the US as I said about Canada, right? You tend to get a lot of attention in Norwegian media, but not so much when it comes to the Arctic, right? It's more your presidential election that takes up a lot of oxygen in this country as well. But I mean, Alaska is 1 out of 50 states, and it's very far away from the big states, the population. Does the Arctic even matter, to put it bluntly, for Americans?
First of all, thanks, Andreas, for the invitation. And you were saying before that you're asking these types of questions because there aren't necessarily a lot of experts in this room here at Arndazuka on Arctic issues. I don't agree with you at all. Just looking out across this audience, I see a lot of really fantastic experts that I've worked with very closely over the past couple of years. We all have, and so this is a great group that has come. So thank you all for coming. Alaska, yeah. So Alaska is far away from the rest of the continental United States, and of course Hawaii. Is it important? Of course, it's important. All of the states are important to the entire United States, and I think people are becoming more and more understanding and wise to the fact that security issues that range everywhere from hard security issues that Amy and Maria and others that you have talked about with respect to the freedom of navigation, with respect to border security, things of that nature are always ever present, but also the security of the environment. And I think people really are understanding throughout the United States just how crucial it is to keep a clean environments in the high north, in places like the Arctic, including in Alaska. And so in working very closely with the government there in Alaska and the indigenous populations and others who are concern about environmental security, people are becoming more and more aware of the importance of keeping and maintaining, a clean and secure Arctic region.
But then you said people are becoming more and more aware.
Yeah.
It does seem, for someone who's an outsider to the US policy development, but it does seem like the US has suddenly realized, or over the last couple of years has suddenly realized that it's an Arctic country. And you just launched an Arctic strategy not long ago, and a defense strategy that came out only a few weeks ago.
That's right.
I mean, what is driving this? I mean, climate change you mentioned, but other things.
Oh, these are hardcore security issues. That's what's driving it. So the reason why we put together a national security strategy that's focused on the Arctic region, the reason why we've had a defense review that's focused on the Arctic region is because we understand there are serious threats out there to the safety, the prosperity, the security and sustainability of the Arctic. And so whether we're talking about Russian aggression, whether we're talking about the future possibility of the PRC using the northern sea routes, for commercial and possibly other traffic. These are issues that we need to start addressing now in partnership with all of our Arctic neighbors and others, even beyond the Arctic. Amy and Maria and I were on a panel in Buda a couple of months ago with our Indian counterpart, right? And so these issues, really span the globe. And so it's these hard and fast security issues that our governments are keenly aware of that has been spurring us to put together strategies that are all-inclusive, right? And so really do include a lot of the issues that we've already covered so that we're not dealing with these things at the last minute. So if there is a security issue that we have to face together with our partners and allies, that we're doing it with a strategy and with cooperation and with planning that we've been developing over years. So that's why we've been doing it.
Does that mean that regardless of who wins the election in November, America or the US will still continue to prioritize Arctic issues?
100%.
Okay.
I have zero doubt about that. Yeah. Because these are important issues on both sides of the aisle, whether you're Republican or Democrat. These are issues that affect all of us domestically in the United States and all of us internationally around the world. So I have, I have 100% confidence that we're going to be moving forward on all of this going forward.
Okay, that's a bet if anyone wants to talk to him afterwards. Okay, but you, Jamal, you mentioned my favorite word, Buda. So let's turn to my hometown and your hometown as well. Bård Ludvig Thorheim, you're a member of parliament from Buda, representing Nordland. Okay, secure, sustainable Arctic, Nordic cooperation, Arctic Council cooperation. You're not in government. Maybe you will be in the future. What would you do differently? I mean, what's your take on this? Do you have maybe perhaps a slight disagreement with some of the participants here?
First of all, talking of Buda, I'd just like to mention that our soccer team, Bodø/Glimt, might actually qualify as the first ever Arctic team to the Champions League. It's very exciting.
We can watch the game tomorrow.
Yes. I think there's a lot of agreement, kind of across the aisle, as you would say in the United States, but between the major parties in Norway in our strategies for the Arctic. But I think that what we are seeing now is a shift where there's not just enthusiasm to cooperate among the Nordic countries, but there's actually realpolitik. There's real strategic interest to cooperate among Nordic countries above the Arctic. And that is because we're seeing now, much more clearly, now that Russia is a bit more out of the picture, so to say, on cooperation, that in terms of minerals, we have huge deposits of minerals in the Arctic. Norway alone is the third biggest exporter of minerals to batteries production in the United States, after China and Canada. We have vast resources for renewable energy. We are also exchanging power between the Nordic countries in the Arctic, and also, of course, the oil and gas, which is supplying Europe, which will be needed throughout the transition. So, and then we have the security on top of that. And that means also that we need to have new logistic routes. So, for example, the port of Narvik, you have iron ore being shipped out, which serves the whole of the European industry, also the defense industry. And in we can ship military material to strengthen our alliance when that is needed, and also to support the Baltic countries. So there's a real strategic importance of the Nordic countries in the Arctic, and I think we've just seen the start of this. And I'm very glad for what our Canadian friend here mentioned, that it's about also getting the local population on board on this, and they will get on board when they see that this is actual cooperation. This is industry being built in my hometown, and then we really see the fruits from cooperation.
So do we really? That's my question to you. I mean, you talk about this potential, right?
Yeah.
Infrastructure or energy, minerals, or other aspects. When you go back home to Bodø and you talk to your constituency or your voters, can you actually point to specific things that are happening right now that is perhaps a result of international cooperation that has a real benefit for these inhabitants?
Yeah, I mean, it's early days, but yeah, for example, I mentioned the port of Narvik, where we will strengthen the railway logistics there. We will, and I think fairly close in the future, we will also have a double track there, as just one example. So that boosts industry, but it's also good for defense. So I think actually people are seeing the logic of this, and they see that results will come. And there's also cooperation with LKAB on the minerals from Sweden. There's real cooperation taking place already.
Okay, Maria, do you disagree?
Just a quick comment. I was actually in Bodø last week. And it's, I have to also mention, I've lived in Tromsø for many years, and I'm not going to comment on the football teams. I love the team, but Bodø-Glimt, heia heia. But I was in Bodø for the Arctic Race of Norway, which is an impressive. It's much more than a race, a bike race. It's a movement. Both physical, well, the cyclists have to move, but it's engaging the people, making them proud of their small local communities. I mean, it's a big thing when a production like that comes to a city like Fauske. It's actually a city, a small, very small one, but then everyone goes out and becomes engaged in this big event because it becomes live streamed. Produced by those same guys who are producing Tour de France, showing a live picture to 189 countries. That small piece of Arctic. And it's not Fauske they're seeing. They're seeing the Arctic from a Norwegian perspective. And that's something. So though that's an example of what is contributing to making it more interesting to living in the Arctic, and I'm very passionate about the Arctic. Lived there, worked there, studied there, I love it. But we see a population decrease, which is affecting the security dimension in a broad sense. And what makes the Nordic very relevant in terms of security? Well, we have two Nordic nations in a record short time joining NATO. So there is more Arctic in NATO, there is more Nordic in NATO, and vice versa. But none of it will work if we don't have people living there. So it will become much more interesting to invest in all types of infrastructure, both digital and of course also military. It goes without saying. But if we do not at the same time invest in cultural infrastructure, in the type of infrastructure which makes a life worth living there, a type of infrastructure that makes it, when you're done with work, go do something that is interesting to you, then it's gonna fall apart. So we need to collectively start thinking even more about how can we lift that cultural dimension, because when it all comes to all, it's about people. And across the aisle in Norway as well, we agree that the High North is our most important strategic area of priority. It's so now more than ever.
Okay, let's talk a bit more actually about one of those dimensions, research. The final participant. I mean, Jørgen Brende, you're a professor and dean at University of Tromsø, Arctic University of Norway. You've listened now to 3 politicians, 2 diplomats, highlighting the importance of the Arctic, various dimensions of Nordic cooperation, international cooperation, and as Maria says, efforts to make people want to live there, move there. What's the challenge?
There are many challenges. I don't disagree with anything of what have been said there, but I think I would like to sort of take this from a different angle and try to answer this from a natural history perspective, natural science perspective. Because when I think of the Arctic, there's one word that comes to mind, and that's connectivity. The Arctic is not isolated. It's not remote. You have ocean currents that combines and connects the entire marine region into one entity. We have climate change that thaws the tundra, increases the river input into this ocean. We have sea ice that is retreating, increasing connectivity in terms of transportation and shipping, connecting, for instance, Asia with Europe. We have atmospheric connections, bringing pollutions from the continents into the Arctic. So it's not possible to understand and study the Arctic in isolation. We cannot take out our part of the Arctic and try to understand the Arctic only from that perspective. So international cooperation is extremely important in order for us to actually be able to understand this fast changing region. So we have this one side of the Arctic that today is almost inaccessible. That is a real challenge that we have to face and that we need to work against or try to resolve in some way. Because without a strong cooperation between all nations around this ocean that is connecting all land masses as well, then we are stuck. We won't be able to get a thorough understanding of the Arctic.
But in your field as a marine biologist, when, as you say, half the Arctic is more or less difficult to or impossible to cooperate with, are you able to find ways to still get data from Russia or still discuss with Russian scientists?
No, that is very, very difficult. There are strong limitations. We say in sort of we like to say that we allow for researcher to researcher cooperation. That's extremely difficult when it comes to Russia. As soon as you enter into any sort of cooperation, you very quickly enter into sort of institution to institution cooperation. So in all practical terms, it's closed.
What about the Nordic countries then? I mean, again, referring back to the tent of Norden, are there any particular rationales for why the Nordic countries could cooperate more together when it comes to research?
Yeah, I think there are many, both in terms of again, natural science, but also in terms of politics. If you look at the map behind us, and if you include Denmark, Greenland into this connection, then our part of the Arctic is where more than 90% of the exchange of water in and out of the Arctic Ocean occurs. So we have this unique opportunity to sort of take a leading role, at least from a marine perspective. But I also think that the other Nordic countries have capabilities that we don't have in terms of, for instance, icebreakers. Finland, Sweden have strong capabilities when it comes to icebreakers, and I don't think we are good enough in cooperating and combining the resources that we have. So I think there are many good reasons why the Nordic countries should take a role, and even though, coming back to what I started out with, we can't expect to be able to draw conclusions or understand the entire Arctic only from our sector. We can at least take a leading role and be a good example on how we can cooperate.
Okay. Before we have to end, which is actually rather soon, and there will be a reception afterwards where you can ask them a lot of questions. I won't give anyone here the chance to ask questions, I'm sorry, but as I said, there will be an informal gathering afterwards. But I mean, the topic again of this session today is international cooperation for a secure and sustainable Arctic. And I wanted to just return to you, Bryndis, just very briefly. Secure and sustainable. And secure can mean many things, and the Canadian ambassador, of course, highlighted that these things are complex. But there is one thing that really is, and many of you have mentioned it, that is driving, say, the focus on the Nordic countries right now, and it's NATO, and the fact that 2 other Nordic countries have recently joined NATO. Do you think, and this is a personal opinion from you, and was also as a president of the Nordic Council at the moment, do you think that having 7 out of 8 Arctic countries now part of the same defense alliance helps us for a secure Arctic? Secure and sustainable Arctic, if you will? The leading question, but...
Yeah. The obvious answer is yes. For us that are part of NATO. But I want to say that I think Norway have done very well in keeping the Arctic Council alive in a very, very difficult time. And as you explained, it is difficult to be in cooperation with Russian scientists, but still you have managed to keep the working groups going on, and that is highly important. But I have also said, when Russia leaves Ukraine and when we will start working together again, what will then happen? I think the Arctic Council will in a way be different with all NATO members and then Russia. But the opportunity is that all security issues were left out of the room in the Arctic Council. So security issue was not discussed there. But now we have a platform to discuss this very important issue that is security in the Arctic. And that is also the reason why I thought, and we in Iceland thought it was important for us now in the presidency, in the Nordic Council, to say, hey, all the Nordic nations, let's remember that we are an Arctic nation, and together we are very, very strong. So Nordic Council can also be a platform to take this important discussion about security. And as was mentioned, security can mean a lot. We are not only talking about army, we are talking about food security, global warming, connectivity, all of that. So it's a very huge aspect. But the answer to your question, short answer is yes, but it will also be difficult ways in the future to find a way how to work with it.
But in a way you are proposing to change the Nordic Council as well.
Well, no, the Nordic Council is the Nordic Council. It's the cooperation between the Nordic nations, and that is strong, and that needs to be strong in the future. But I'm just saying that we should maybe add also the focus of the Arctic, because our Arctic focus is so important in geopolitical aspects, that the Nordic nations should also be a strong voice in the Arctic, and we can use the Nordic Council also as a platform for this discussion, because there we have parliamentarians from all the Nordic nations.
Okay. If you disagree, you can talk to Bryndis over a glass of wine in a few minutes. But Maria, you had a quick follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. It's so easy to agree with everything Bryndis is saying. The success of the Arctic Council and the fact that it is still alive, and it's very much a voluntary membership. Russia has chosen not to exit, although the organization is very much in a definitely not business as usual state. You know, from a Norwegian perspective, a key priority for our High North policy has always been a High North, low tension. You know, in many ways, and this is my personal opinion, in many ways we can say that that is still the case. It just has different contents. What it means is something else. if we have the success of Arctic Council is also what we have not talked about within the framework of the soft diplomacy. What we have talked about is science, how to challenge or how to approach those common challenges which climate change is posing to everyone living in the Arctic. And then if we then combine that with other platforms where we can talk about hardcore security, if we leave that still outside of the forest where we haven't talked about that, we can achieve a high north low tension in a different way. And that is my belief. So we need to think alternatively. We need to think more east-west than we have done previously. There has been a lot of north-south thinking especially in Norwegian and Nordic high north policies. So we need to rethink our models of how we cooperate in the Arctic. But it is possible to keep the Arctic exceptionalism going. It is possible to have a high north low tension, and it is possible to have continued peace in the Arctic.
Okay, I think that's a very good way of ending. But before we end, we actually have a couple of final minutes, and we had actually several others who we wanted to have on the stage with us, ambassadors and others. But as you see, the stage is already quite packed. But I wanted to just give the final comment, if you will, to Ambassador Nicolas de la Grande-Ville, who's the EU ambassador. So Nicolas, your reflections a bit, just 1 minute on what you've heard from an EU perspective.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Very interesting.
He needs a microphone.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes. We are very involved in as the EU. We are involved in the Arctic, not because many member states are. We are interested by nature because when there are global challenges close to our in our regional vicinity, we are also very interested, and we have the informal status of being an informal observer at the Arctic Council. So we are there. I would say it's very easy to agree with everything that has been said, and I would like to thank those who mentioned the European Union. For us, cooperation is by nature, by essence. So of course we favor cooperation in all aspects that you have mentioned. Security, of course, economic, social, human dimension. And I would also insist on the background we have. That's the environment challenge. We heard earlier on, once we have sorted out all human-made challenges and problems, we still have the environment. And it strikes harder the Arctic than everywhere else. I will try to find a few examples of this cooperation we are having in the north. I would say it's the human dimension. In Norway, 10% of the population lives above the Arctic Circle. So I would throw simply Budo, European Capital of Culture, with two other capitals, two cities and regions in Europe. The Interreg cooperation projects, human cooperation between north of Norway, north of Sweden, north of Finland. The Horizon Europe programs in science and technology. We have an annual meeting of the indigenous people from the Arctic in Brussels, taking place mid-May. And then, since we are also a bit of a practical toolbox, we work on fire and fight against fires. Maybe it's not that much of a current risk, but it's an emerging risk with the challenges on the environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you so much to Norden and Norden's tent. I'm giving the final word to Unni Kløvstad, I've been told, who will lead us into a reception, perhaps? No?
No, she will talk a bit later.
Okay, she will talk a bit later. So then you're all free to mingle and bombard them with the questions that I didn't allow you to ask. Thank you.